In discussing globalization and the institution of family, I reckon that these two topics were already massive enough on their own. So I opted to keep my collage very simple so I don't stray too far and go on a tangent. Um, and while they say that, a picture speaks 1,000 words, I have three, so this should be enough for me to discuss. So I want to give it some context into the picture on the right of these rice bags. My cousins in Vietnam used to work in a rice export factory, and this is a pretty big export factory, and there were a lot of people working there. Um, and this is important to mention because um, the act of exporting and importing goods is obviously a product of globalization because it globalization essentially um, produces some kind of economic restructuring or some movements between movement of goods between and within countries. So this export of rice represents that part. Um, and while there's this notion that globalization produces more benefits than it does drawbacks, or depending on what literature you read, but I think that the benefits and drawbacks are kind of equal. We hear that it produces both winners and losers in the social world, and I would definitely categorize my family as the losers because um, they're essentially a marginalized population. They live in a rural area. There's a lot of homeless people. There's not many social support programs in Vietnam, and I'm sure by now the government has the government has reduced family support programs in order to more efficiently control monetary flow. And this, of course, is influenced by globalization um, because there's a strong emphasis again on economic restructuring. So the increase in capital in the country obviously kind of just brings out some I would dare say bad sides of the human condition. With managers in this rice factory specifically, my family has brought up that they exploit a lot of poor folks since they don't really they don't really have a choice of turning down this work. They have to depend on their labor because what can you do if you're unskilled and you don't have a college degree? Like you have to, as Marx would say, use your labor to survive. Um, so there's a class consciousness tied to globalization, and my family has definitely felt its impact. Um, to make a long story short, the the conditions and the low wages weren't cutting it, and they felt this burden. They couldn't explain it, but I'm I'm approaching it with the picture on the left bottom here of these individuals being linked by these nodes. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to call them spheres or orbs, right? Let's first look at this lady in the yellow shirt. She's carrying a small white sphere with one hand, and I analyze this as having experienced just enough, just the right amount of benefits from globalization, such as having more job opportunities. And we can kind of characterize this figure right here as being a part of a more privileged group compared to the individual on the right carrying this very large central sphere here. And this represents the losers of globalization because for the poor, you already have to rely on yourself to survive, but in with the introduction of globalization, there's an even stronger emphasis on entrepreneurship and self-reliance. So there's a bigger burden for these individuals to carry. Individuals like my family. Um, there's no social safety nets, as I mentioned earlier, because the government is more keen on reducing and limiting the amount of these programs. So it takes a different toll on different people, but and for my family, they're definitely on the losing side. Um, so hopefully, I don't want to be pessimistic, but hopefully, the world as a whole will experience more good than bad from globalization. I try to look on the bright side. I actually contacted my family who worked in this rice factory a few months back, and they updated me that one of their sons, who's my cousin, he's actually quitting the job in the rice factory and moving to Japan for 4 years, and he's working under a contract between two companies in Vietnam and in Japan. So we see this exchange of labor provided by globalization. So certainly not all is lost. There's more work opportunities, and he's making more than he ever could working in Vietnam in this rice factory. But again, there's always a setback. He's now separated from his family. There's no interconnectedness. There's a shift in familial relationships. There's a change in dynamics. So there's always a cost when it comes to benefits. Um, but at the end of the day, all we can really do is, well, from a passive point of view, all we can do is hope. But of course, there's a lot of more productive things we can do, like create support programs or participate in the local community. But yeah, that's pretty much a very brief, retelling of my family's experience. I thought it was fitting in this topic of globalization and family.